Hello students, welcome to this video, and in this video we'll be discussing chapter 2 of the novella A Handful of Nuts by Ruskin Bond. So we stopped at that point in that is chapter 1 stopped at that point while describing the routine of the narrator. We stopped at that point where Sitaram had come into the narrator's room and he offered to wash the narrator's sheet, and the narrator refused, but then he took the sheet and he replaced it with a sheet from the restaurant Indiana. And that is where we stopped, and of course we had a small there was a bit of a discussion about the sheets and where the sheets came from. And initially he was offering a sheet from the hospital. Sitaram offered a sheet from the hospital, but then he said, okay, if you are not comfortable about those sheets, because those sheets were used to cover the dead bodies in the hospital, in the morgue. And then he finally gives a particular sheet from Indiana Hotel. Okay, and then he says, don't worry, for Indiana, in the Indiana Hotel, I will give the hospital sheet as an exchange. Because ultimately everybody is going to demand their clothes back, or their sheets, whatever clothes or sheets have been given for washing. Everyone needs an account of that. Even one cloth or one sheet cannot be less. So he does this. Chapter 1 ends with this. Where is this one from? The narrator asks. Indiana Hotel. I will give them a hospital sheet in exchange. And this is how chapter 1 ends. So let us come to chapter 2. In fact, chapter 2, we are not yet through with the routine of the narrator. The narrator continues talking about his routine. So the narrator continues talking about his routine, and it is evening now. Okay, it is night, and let us see what he has for dinner. Actually, before, I mean, one expects that the narrator will be talking about dinner because it's almost 8 o'clock in the night, and he's actually going to the bazaar. He's on the way to the bazaar. But then it is 8 in the night, 8 o'clock at night, and all right. And what happens is, actually, before going to the bazaar, he does a small, he stops over at the outside the Maharani's house. You remember in chapter 1, there was an incident in which the narrator meets the Maharani and her daughter Indu. And there was, when they were in school, when the narrator and Indu were in school, he had sent letters to her. So he goes and stands outside the Maharani's house, okay? And from a place where they cannot see him, he tries to look at Indu, okay? So that is what he does at the beginning of chapter 2. The entire, it's night and there is only moonlight. So what he does is, the narrator stops near the Maharani's house and tries to tries to see if he can look at. So he is now at the Maharani's house and wants to see if he can see Indu. Okay, and here, see, let us be very clear. We know that the narrator is a writer. Indu. Okay, the narrator is a writer, and every writer. It's not that he writes short stories, but let us be very. Any writer will have one main genre of writing. So, for example, a novelist will write a novel. In this story, the narrator is a short story writer and earns from short stories. Of course, he also writes novels, and that is also being talked about. But let us be very clear: you can write anything, and you can write in any genre. So here he attempts poetry, and okay, so he was trying to get a glimpse of Indu. He wants to look at her. Glimpse, you understand? Glimpse means just look at her for a short while. Just able to, if he's able to see her, he'll be very happy. So he was trying to get a glimpse of Indu, and while doing that, he appears, he wants to write poetry. Okay, a poem about a small virgin rose. Okay, so he wants to write a poem. Incidentally, I want to point out that you know that J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter series. Even in the novel, J.K. Rowling has dabbled or has attempted poetry. In fact, if you go through all the novels, the entire Harry Potter set, you will see that there are many places where she has attempted poetry and where she has revealed that she has a talent for writing poetry. So it's not that a writer will not, a short story writer will not write a novel, or a person who writes a novelist will not write a poem. They'll try to be comfortable in all genres, but they'll have one main genre in which they will publish more. Okay, so here the narrator, the writer, is attempting a poem, and he wants to write a poem about a small red virgin rose. Okay, he sees her, she had a book in her hand, so I guessed she had been reading. Maybe if I sent her a poem, she'd read it. This is what he thinks. So he just gets a glimpse of Indu, not too much. Just he sees her, and then he goes to the bazaar. It's almost 8 o'clock, and now he's in Dehradun's bazaar, and he describes the bazaar, as it was in the 1950s. So let's come to that. So the first thing he does is, in the evening, he goes to the Maharani's house. Of course, this cannot be part of a routine, but still, he's describing a typical day. He goes to the Maharani's house, gets a glimpse of Hindu, wants to write a poem on a rose, and then he comes to the bazaar. And look at it, he comes to the bazaar, and the bazaar is full of people. At 8 o'clock, it's crowded, and what happens is, he's just going around looking at, just walking around in the bazaar, when his friend Jai Shankar meets him. Okay, it's busy, it's crowded with people, and then he contrasts it with, we are looking at 1950s Dehradun, and let's be very clear, there were hardly any vehicles in the 1950s. Okay, so cars were very rare. The main mode of transport, people used to walk, or at the most take a cycle. Okay, and we are going to see the narrator riding, taking cycle rides, long cycle rides from Dehradun to various places. So we'll come to that as the novel progresses. We'll look at that. So we are in the bazaar, okay, and it is 1950s Dehradun, so it's full of people, and they keep on, sometimes they bump into each other, but that's India. That's how things are, and it's crowded, and then he bumps into the without. I mean, he didn't expect to meet him. So there is someone putting a hand on his shoulder, and he turns to see that it's Jai Shankar, okay, from Doon School. So Jai Shankar and the narrator were. So we see Jai Shankar, okay, and he calls him the genius from Doon School. So, and then he says, Jai Shankar says, a bit of information about Jai Shankar. Jai Shankar, the genius from Doon School, whose father owned the New Empire Cinema. Okay, so Jai Shankar's father, his father, owned the New Empire Cinema, and Jai is close with the narrator, and he has the habit of persuading the narrator to spend money on him for small things, for very small things. Like, for example, now he's saying jalebis. Okay, so Jai Shankar wants the narrator. So he wants the narrator to buy him jalebis. Okay, the narrator is actually not. Look, he's a freelance writer. He will have money if and only if the payment comes. He sends short stories and the payment comes. Okay, Jai Shankar has a steady. I mean, he has a steady. I mean, not a steady source of income, but he's not poor. His financial situation is much better than the narrator's, and yet wants the narrator to buy him jalebis. Okay, so that is why. And what are jalebis? Remember, in North India, if you've gone to North India, you will see this. They'll serve on a leaf or on a disposable plate. They'll usually serve samosas. If you ask for kachori, they'll give you kachori, and they'll give you a small amount of potato curry, potato sabzi. That is, it will be wet and it will be runny. Okay, and they'll also serve jalebi. Jalebis are part of your breakfast in North India. It's not just part of your breakfast. People have jalebis along with tea and also sometimes at dinner. So it's like a, it's like a all meal snack. You can have this sweet snack with any meal. Okay, so he asks him to buy jalebis, and so the author is wondering. He says it is easier to borrow from a poor man than it is to borrow from a rich one. Why is that, I wonder? This is what the author asks. So the narrator is relatively poor. The narrator is not, is not, exactly very rich, or, he's not getting all these, everything depends on the payments that come. And yet, Jayashankar, who is relatively well off, okay, I'll just write it here, who is relatively well off, does not want to spend on the jalebis, but wants, see, he could have hosted the author, he could have, given money, and, he could have spent money and brought the author, brought the narrator jalebis, but he does not do that. So the narrator calls himself poor and he says, look, this is how it is. And then he talks about the other friend also, not just Jayashankar, but William Matheson also. William, and let me get the spelling right. William, Matheson. These are his two friends. Even he would ask narrators for the narrator for small sums of money. Say something like, why don't you pay for my cigarettes? Why don't you pay for my laundry bills, or something like that? Okay. In fact, William was he used to consume Charminar cigarettes, and for that, he used to ask the narrator for money. So both Jayashankar and William Matheson asked the narrator for money, used to take small sums of money and never return it, because they were friends. So that is the assumption that these two friends have. Okay. But anyway, the narrator is a bit, I won't say sad, but he wonders why, him being poor, he is poor, and yet people are asking, his friends are asking him for money. So with William Matheson, it was cigarettes and laundry bills. So if there are any laundry bills, the narrator pays for them. Something like, pay this small amount of money, something like that. Okay, so and in fact, so he wonders, and he is able to, the Jay is able to understand what is going on. So he says, look, you would have anyway received money for your short stories. He's that confident. So let me tell the page number. We are in chapter 2, page number 9. When the narrator says, I haven't had a check for weeks, I told him. What about the story you were writing for the BBC? So Jay is very confident that the narrator has money. Okay. And that this is not a big deal. Okay. He is confident that the narrator has money, and he would have got money from the short stories. So they, and by the way, Jay had some tastes and all that. So he goes, of course, that it be revealed shortly. What about the novel that you were writing? You are going to get payment for that also, no? So he's telling this as he's eating jalebis. He's confident that the narrator has money. Okay, the narrator has money with him. Always you should know, you should check before you ask someone something, But anyway, so in spite of being from a well-to-do family, he is, he is asking for small loans of money, which he never returns. Okay. So anyway, so Jay is confident that the narrator has got money. And then of course, who is Jay? So he is aspiring to be an artist. We'll look at his art later. Okay. Artist, poet, and diarist. That is a person who writes diaries. Is there something called as, diary writing, which is a accepted genre in literature? Yes, it is. Okay. We have a diarist called Samuel Pepys. We'll talk about that person later, especially when we talk about literary forms. We'll be talking about diarists also. That is those who write diaries as literature. Okay. So he wants to be an artist, a poet, and a diarist. And not only that, he has an ideal. His ideal is the French writer André Gide. Okay, André Gide. And in fact, he had Andre Gide, and he had given Gide's, he had lent the narrator a particular book by Gide, which is called Fruits of the Earth. Shankar wants to be an artist, a poet, and a diarist. Okay, so now Jai Shankar has had his jalebis. There is no problem at all. But Jai has a problem. He has a particular fear. He has a fear of the dark. So the narrator is forced not only to spend money for Jai Shankar's jalebis, but also to escort him home. Okay, so let us look at that. So the narrator escorts Jai Shankar home. Okay, you understand escorts? Jai home. You understand this? What do you mean escort? That is, be his guide or his or his bodyguard or something like that, so that Jai does not fear the dark. Okay, Jai Shankar is afraid of the dark, so the narrator has to accompany him, has to escort him to his house. All right, and again we have a description of the dark lanes of Dehradun. Okay, so from the bazaar, which is very well lit, Jai goes home along with the narrator. The narrator escorts Jai home. I'll write it here. The lanes, we are in page number 10, of course. Jai Shankar, because he was afraid of the dark, he had a torch handy. Okay, so he used to have a small torch with him, which used to light the way. But then there was, and why was he afraid? There is a reason for him being afraid. So what happens is, there is a particular house, okay, where a woman had hanged herself from a mango tree on that lane. The lane through which Jai Shankar and the narrator are going, has a house in which a particular woman had hanged herself. So that is why Jai Shankar is very afraid, okay. It was said that a woman had hanged herself from a mango tree on this very lane, and Jai was always in a dither lest he should see the lady dangling in front of him. So he believed that he would see the ghost of that lady, hanging on that mango tree or in that house. So he was terrified of the dark. So Jai Shankar was afraid or terrified of the dark, and the narrator had to do this. And then there is a wonderful description about the darkness, that there are various kinds of darkness. Okay, see, for example, even while I'm shooting this, or when we are looking at something, you can switch off one light, it will become a bit darker. You can switch off both lights, it will become even darker. So he goes and describes darkness. Page number 11, he says, I do not care for a torchlight. So he has a torchlight. He went and Jai Shankar reaches home, and on the way back, okay, the narrator talks about various kinds of darkness. The narrator is more used to the darkness than Jai, and he talks about darkness, and it's a beautiful description of how many shades of darkness we have, how many types of darkness we have. And he says, I had taught myself to use whatever the night afforded. The night offered. See, already there was moonlight. So moonlight, full and partial, starlight, the light from street lamps, from windows, from half-open doors. The night is beautiful, made ugly only by the searing headlights of cars. Searing headlights means too strong, okay? Searing headlights of cars. So he is used to the darkness, and there are various kinds of darkness that he describes. Various kinds of darkness that one experiences. You have the moonlit night, you have this, you have that. Page number 11. Please go through that. Second paragraph, please go through that. So now he comes back home. Now there is his home is also, he comes back home. That is, of course, by home I mean he comes back to his room. He comes back to his room and he finds that the room is dark. Now another fact is revealed. Remember, in just in the previous video, in chapter 1, we saw that he had rented a room above a provision store in a place called Astley Hall. Okay. Now the room is dark because this room, the landlady, who is the landlady? She's a Punjabi lady, and in fact a widow, had forgotten to or had not paid the electricity bill. So there was no chance of any light being there in his room. So I had no lights as my landlady had neglected to pay the electricity bill for the past 6 months. He could. So what is the restriction that the narrator has? He can write. The narrator can write only during the day. Okay, when there is light, which is during the day. Okay, can write during the day. So what does he do at night? Well, he thought, look, let us not waste time. I had anyway thought of writing a poem to Indu. So writing a short story, it's a problem. There's a problem. You have to write line by line. Here, I can always compose a poem. Okay, so he thinks this dark. He takes this darkness as as a most of us would have considered it as usually it is considered negative, but he thinks darkness, since the room is dark, I can use this time, this I can write. There is no problem in writing. I still can write. I can still write a poem. Okay, and the poem is on it's not on a rose, but it's on page 12. I would like you to read the poem. If possible, I'll read it out aloud here, but I could always manage a few lines of poetry on a large white sheet of paper. Okay, this sheet of paper is my garden. Let me read out the poem to you. This sheet of paper is my garden. These words my flowers. I do not ask a miracle this night, other than you beside me in the bright moonlight, naked, entwined like the flowering vine. And then he got stuck, because you see, you write any composition, you write, even when you're writing answers, you'll be stuck at some point. So he writes a poem. It's described in page, it's given in page 12, and he got stuck. And so then he thinks, look, this poem is inspired by something that I've heard somewhere. And he realizes that this poem is almost has shades of, or is a copy of a popular song called September Song. Okay, so he has taken this from September Song, which is a popular song that he likes. Okay, it's a copy of that. Okay, he's copying it from September Song. That's what he realizes that, and then he says, okay, so he's a bit disappointed. I mean, he thinks, oh God, I should not have written a poem like this, because anyway it's a copy. Anyway, it's inspired by the song Shades of September, by the song September Song. So well, let us see what can be done. So he wanted to write this poem and present it to Indu. Then he realizes, look, let's try some other way in which we can impress Indu, some other way in which we can pass on our message. And then that is how chapter 2 ends. So chapter 2 begins by the author, with the author standing outside the Maharani's house, rather, in a manner in which nobody can see him. And then he tries to take a glimpse, see Indu, and he gets a glimpse of her. He comes to the bazaar, meets his friend Jaishankar, who persuades him to buy him jalebis. The author says that he doesn't have much money with him. He has a lot of money with him. He doesn't have much money. Jaishankar persuades him anyway. He says, no, don't worry. You will always get the money from the BBC story or from the novel, etc. And then after eating jalebis, Jaishankar has to be escorted home because Jaishankar is afraid of the dark. The narrator, while coming back, thinks about darkness, comes back to the room, and then we realize that the room is dark because the electricity bill has not been paid by the Punjabi lady, the landlady. And then he uses the darkness inspires him to write a poem. And actually, he thinks that he's going to send this poem to Indu, but then he realizes that maybe Indu may not be impressed with this. So chapter 2 ends. I would have to think of a more mundane method of making my feelings known. A mundane method means, I need not be so poetic. There are other ways of making my feelings towards Indu known. That is how chapter 2 ends. So he is still in thinking of Indu, and he has still. Our conclusion is that he still has feelings for her. So we'll stop there for today. Chapter 2 is over. This ends chapter 2, and in the next video we'll be looking at chapter 3, which is very interesting, because a particular a VIP comes to town. Okay. In fact, VIP from the film world comes to town. Thanks a lot, people. Watch this and come back with your answers. Come back with your. Please ask your questions, and please look forward to the next video, which will be a video on chapter 3. Thank you.